So yeah, without further ado, with the spirit of community in mind, I want to invite you all to read the beautiful essay that Dana Levin wrote, the foreword to this book. I won't read it this evening just for the sake of time. But Dana Levin, the amazing poet, I highly recommend her work, selected this book to win the Honickman Prize, a tremendous gift. And she wrote a really beautiful, thoughtful, helpful essay that appears at the beginning of this collection. And I think that it provides insight into the collection that I didn't even have. I mean, that's why we love our readers, our closest, most careful readers. So I highly recommend that. Yeah, so I think I'll just jump in. Thank you all so much for having me. Public abstract. Public abstract. I slept and am sweeping, have slept and am sleeping. I heaved the head of the mop to the hod, and I'm heaving. I'm sweating. I'm wetting the corner of my broom. I'm washing the floor in the room where I waited for reason. I reasoned. I teased at the edges of reason. Second one. About. The rest. Still I keep myself. I take to bed. One lung is red. Cut red flowers hung in water. My other lung is out of line. From one lung, I tell the truth. From the other lung, I lie. Cut pink flowers hung in red water. Like a pain, the truth is mine. The lie is that today I want to die. Cut red water hung in pink flowers. The rest of it is stillness, rest. A soft cough into a hard pan. A hard cough into a soft plain. Cut pink water hung in red flowers. I was reticent in childhood. Prepared for nothing. Testing fragrant waters at the toilet water counter, diagramming sentences. I ran the empty aisles of Mercy's auditorium, annexed out of my own little annex, made a little art of panicking. I thought that I could love. I thought that I could love my fear. Could build with it a desk and chest of drawers, like fear was made of pine and nails and glue. Could sew myself into a dress with it, or matching set in shocking blue. Could plait my hair with it, could paint with it, could thin my paint with it. Could spread it like a sheet onto my bed. Could slice a loaf of bread on fear's serrated edge. I failed already. Unbegun. The sun already going down above my house, and I have nothing done. I've come unsorted, mortified, to move my body through the world in the way that it demands, demanding as the world does a pin into my hand. The body through the world like a particle of sand that moves forever toward the sphere where it began. I've come unmanned, inhabited, a host, been coaxed out of my house by fear, idea after idea. As if my thinking flipped and fled my body out my naked ear. I'm haunted as a ghost. I've come undone. I needled at my needfulness until it stung. I swept as if my sweeping was a form of reading, held the broom of sleep beneath my teeth until I slept, and as I slept, I knew that I was sleeping. I couldn't drive. I couldn't drive, and so I got a ticket. Tried to make the trip alone by train, accompanied by salience and pain, the platitude of being moved through space and time. So when I made a go of it and we arrived, I felt a falter in my salience, a swaying in my pride, and like a child, picked it up and carried the idea away. And so instead today, in stocking feet, I tarried to my bed and tried to stay. There was a clearance. There was a clearance in my health, a sudden voice. The long arm of the mind reached toward me with a choice. She said, I made arrangements. Get up from your bed. She held a washcloth to the swollen belly of my head. Whether to his life or death, I couldn't tell. My health, a dispossession like a sail. I wasn't ill, an indecision, but I wasn't well. I had a bout. I had a bout of something undefined, another rattle in the lung, as if I stood under the ladder of my childhood for years before I climbed a single rung. I had a bout of vertigo inside my chest, a clocking from within, was bested by the worst of me again. As if my body shook off all its walls and doors and reeled the outside in. I had a bout of something like a flame, a burning in the core, like shame, the ache, the size and color of a thought, a boutness, like a cloth I cannot shake. 3 odes. 1. I asked my brother, Death, about his journey to the center of the world, where he lost his life in winter but bought it back in spring with money that he siphoned from our mother's wedding ring. He said, my sister, Death is not as cunning as you think. He brought me to his little well of ink whenever I asked, and let me drink a little from his flask of life, and pleaded with me when I left. He begged me not to leave. And so I sat with Death, beneath our mother's dogwood tree, my brother and his death on either side of me. 2. I've mourned my living brother many years. This is the heavy table of my work. I lug the heavy table of my work around all day, so I am never rid of it. I am never rid of it. The work that carries me like I'm a tired child sleeping in its arms. I sleep in my brother's arms. It takes all his strength to carry me. With all my strength, I lug my brother up the hill where we, as children, buried pill bugs and finger holes. My brother buried pill bugs in the ground. I dug them up. I dig my brother's body from the ground, from beneath the heavy table of the earth. He lugs around the heavy table of the earth, the maple tree that grows out of his head. The maple tree that grows out of his head is heavy with the longing of the dead. My brother's death is long and heavy as a year. I've mourned my living brother all my life. 3. I don't know my brother as a man, a force of nature, rather, like the wind that brushes up against the house because it must. He makes demands. He carries with him fallen leaves and mites and owl pellets, ridden with the shattered bones of mice, because he must. I didn't know my brother as a boy. Burgeoning, we parted into different woods, he using his own shadow like a mattress on the floor, where he could pull his body from his mind like pulling corn silk off the husk. And I, to using sadness like a broom, and sweep my shadow up. My head and its ache. My head and its ache, close as two sisters in Nikolai Tonitsa's painting. Two girls with gusty eyes, leaning on elbows over an open book. They look forward, like fasciated heads of the same weed. They don't read. We are tired of reading. Coda. Form implies the opposite of form, a globule, formlessness, a letting go. Like fear implies the opposite of fear, approximation of the human form built in packing snow. And yet, the opposite of form, relief from form, implies the opposite relief from formlessness. Packing snow made globular when thrown is blown back into the ether of the whole, like grief. So originally my sections didn't have names, they didn't have titles. And I had a really great experience working with American Poetry Review. So I don't want to sound, like I'm complaining. But as the book was being produced, I was working with Dana, who was helping me edit it and working with an editor at the press. And this question of what the book was about kept coming up, like, you need to market a book. It's ultimately a product. What's it about? What's it about? Write us some back copy to put on the website, please. Which is
Good job making Diane do it.
yeah, exactly. I was like, how about blurbs? But yeah, I struggled with that, to be honest, because it's not a project book in a lot of ways. There are a lot of different themes, a lot of abouts going on in this book. And a lot of abouts that are more implicit perhaps than explicit. And so I thought it would be, I guess, a little bit funny to call the section about. And I added in that poem about the bout. That was a recent one. So yeah, I like telling that story to a room full of writers. Don't worry about aboutness so much. Okay, section 2, revisions. The mosquito. 1. The mosquito rejects her prime, the summertime, rejects her onus to be born in inch-deep water. She rejects it like rejecting sleep, like sleep without integrity, rejects the raft, her peers, the itch, the inch-deep mirror, the water deep as mirror glass. 2. The mosquito rejects me, her sense per millisecond. In her wake, a welt. All summer long, I fan myself, gape at the size of certain sunflowers, rattle at the bolted door between her death and me. When she dies, she conquers me. I scratch the itch of certainty. Revision. 1. Like a crowd, a body moves without a mind, moves without an ambit, tilts without an axis, pulls without a magnet. A school of fish could tell you that. The wind is more a rudder than a mast. 2. The body, like the mind, moves in crowds. A worm or wave or kiln could tell you that. The worm, a solitary iteration of the fish. The wave, a solitary iteration of the wind. The kiln is thinking itself warm. 3. The body moves with crowded lines. A worm or wave could tell you that. The worm with the mind of a fish. The fish with the mind of a wave. The wave with the mind of a kiln, thinking itself warm. 6 revisions. This poem is in 6 sections, but they're not numbered, so I'll just pause. The doctor holds my chest against the discus, listens like the fish below the ice, listens to the fisherman. Medicine, he says, is not an exact science. He listens like the ice fisherman listens to the fish. I breathe into a nebulizer and think about translation, inexact art, a fine particulate mist. Snow has fallen on still green grass, daubed with yellow leaves. 3 takes on a line from St. Augustine's Confessions. An acquaintance posted one online to the delight of followers, of us. And in delight, I went to the source, the lexicon, 3 alike online translators, some fishy, copied, pasted, fished out of the public sphere. And each rings like a different key. Snow has fallen on yellow grass, daubed with still green leaves. Poor old pear thief, Augustine, half biographer. 1. Quote, where should my heart flee to in escaping from my heart? 2. Quote, where could my heart flee to in escaping from my heart? 3. Quote, or where could my heart flee from my heart? Grass has fallen on still white snow, daubed with yellow leaves. In the first translation is a hammering, should, a moral judgment, an oiled object laid bare on a linen bed, shouldn't, tied around the should with butcher's string. In the second, a yip, a certainty, desperate in its forwardness. Where could, as if the possible eluded him, to boot denied its final mark. The thought falling from where could, like rain from a cloud, a vanishing source. Grass has fallen on yellow snow, daubed with snow white leaves. This will cut the cough off from the brain, the doctor says. Offers me a tiny cup of codeine orange syrup. The ache escapes the orange silk out of my the ache escapes like orange silk out of my orange lung. I slide into a mirror of my feelings, my face enlarged, expanding like a sponge. I grab at it. The doctor says, I lost it in the war. He's talking about his thumb. Yellow leaves have fallen on white snow, daubed with still green grass. In the third Augustine translation is a thrum. For where could my heart flee from my heart? The thrum escaped the darkness of the drum. No 2 this time. The 2 escaped the darkness of the thrum. Yellow leaves have fallen on green grass, daubed with still white snow. Failed Sestina. You know, you know. With my ear to the door of my cell, and my want like a comb in my hair, like a veil where there is no veil, with a ring in my ear, a ring in the hole of my ear. I rap at the door of my will and the door of my want, as to will them away. My want like a veil on the floor. I appear at the door of my will with a veil in my hand and a comb in my hair. My want like a hole that I bore in the floor. Where my will is more feeling than veil, and my veil is more want for a veil than a veil, I wear the comb of my fear in my hair. My veil is as thin as my want, and my want is as thin as a hair. When I curl up my want in the curl of my hair, when I curl up on the floor of the cell of my want, I bear my fear in my cells, like I'm bearing a ring, like I'm curled up inside of the ring in my ear. I rap at my want for a door where there is no door, a will where there is no will, at my want for unveiling, my will to unveil it, the curve of my will and my ear to the door, with the curl of my ear to the door. Revision. I dressed myself like Princess Margaret on a grouse hunt and took my dog into the pouring rain. Like Yeats, I made my song a coat from heel to throat and walked my dog into the pouring rain. We walked through other people's plots and rooms until my coat was soaked completely through with rain. My dog was happy to be wet, a shadow in the pouring rain. The neighborhood was verdant, green, and empty, stairs and gals and porches streaming in the pouring rain. We passed a single woman and her dog who looked like mine, dressed like me for walking in the pouring rain. Yeats wrote, "Let them take it," which I take to mean his pain, his resolute disguise. There's enterprise, he wrote, in walking naked in the pouring rain. Ode. Andrea taught me to ride side saddle. I rode in small and dizzying circles around her. I rode around her in small and dizzying circles, past the mirror and past the mirror where, one summer, she was reared off by a stallion attacking his own flaring reflection. One summer she was reared off, or almost. I rode into the acres of our sunflowers. In the acres, the fields, I overindulged in beauty. In the fields I rode. Andrea leaned on a rail, her body a rail. Andrea leaned on the shadow of a rail. My shadow rode around her, the small bells of my intuition. She rang the small bells of my saddle. I was small and dizzying. I was dizzy. I rode in small and dizzying circles. Andrea taught me to ride, no stirrups. Nothing suspending my body but intuition, the small and dizzying circles of my body. My intuition rode around me in small and dizzying circles, her shadow riding circles around me. I called her Andrea. Sestina with 6 titles. I tried. I tried to set my longing down. I tried. Behind the white chalk circles my longing drew. Neatly I backed away from longing, drew all of my swords at once, my hands on the back of the head of all my new longing. I met. I met my longing in the heat. Tired and hot, I tried to shelter my longing's head, drew hasty circles in the sand with my swords as if to signal stay away. I traveled. I traveled with my longing, far away, folded and packed my longing alongside my shirts and swords, And as we walked, I tried recalling all my longing circles from the circles inside my head. I rode. I rode my longing like a horse, my sword like a lasso stirring above my head. I lassoed my longing, tried to break my longing away from its wildness, but longing ran the fence, circle after circle. I lost. I lost myself inside my longing circles, fell into my longing like a sword into the sea. My longing lost itself inside my head, and so I tried to find a way to set it down. I tried. I sought to steal my longing's head. I sought. I sought to steal my longing's head, steal language of my longing away, watch the bloodied circles seep from the neck of my longing. Many times my longing tried to kill me with my own sword. Dune after dune, the blousy heads of onions, wishing my longing away. The horse tried. The mirage of the horse tried. If you read this poem carefully, you'll see that there's a missing capital letter in that last tercet. And the book is going into a second printing next year, and that will be fixed. So
If that's it, you're way ahead of the curve.
yeah, I kind of love it. I kind of love the error. This is a book about error. But you all have a first edition copy now, so you're welcome. Okay, revision sonnet. 1. I found a sequence in my way, idea where there was no idea before, and plucked it up as if it was already mine, an interruption, like a sequin that fell off my sleeve in childhood and through the sieve of time. 2. I found a pattern in my path, ideal where there was no ideal before, and tucked my arm into the crook of hers as if she was already mine. A stipulation, like a fracture in the spine, a rupture in the sleeve of time. 3. A frequency was in my way. I heard a line I didn't hear before and took it down as if it was already mine. A modulation, blatant as a rhyme, as if a bead fell off my sleeve in childhood and landed in my mind. That one's about writing poems. Surety. I'm sure as wetness follows steam. I'm sure as cold that follows wetness follows steam. I'm sure as steam that follows heat, the bead of sweat that follows steam. I'm sure as heat, as surety, the bleed and heave of surety. I'm in the midst of sureness, sure as bricks. I'm sure as cold that follows wetness follows mist, the blood and heft of sureness, sure as mud, sure as blood that follows wetness follows sweat, as sure as heat that follows wetness follows wet. I'm in the midst of sureness, sure as steam, the hiss and scream of sureness, sure as mist. I'm sure as blood that follows meat. I'm sure as meat. I'm in the heat of surety, the bleat and seethe of surety, the mist that follows certainty. Section 3. Later fragments. I traveled to expectancy. I traveled to expectancy through expectancy, feared my way through fear, my scholarship. Criterion among criterions. I loitered at the wooden door. I had a touch of something like a flu, a forfeiture of something in my gut. But like a charm, a gendered thing, I guess. I wasn't swayed to bring it up. I remember partially. My searching party, going out in search of my own life, like lantern light, like water sloshing down the front of me, and calling my own name into the forest dusk. A partial sound, a painful braying syllable that grounded like a current in the dirt a yard in front of me. But I resorted to it like a witness does to memory. And reason followed me, allowed me to the depression in the land where I was hiding in the wet, my shirt and socks soaked through with mud and sweat. I didn't make it easy on myself. I never do.
It's the same bird, yeah.
Okay.
Well, that's nice. Does anyone know what page for that is?
Yeah.
Oh my God.
It's not a very good.
Yeah. Well, all are very welcome here.
It's way out.
Would I go on?
Yeah, go on. I can't blame it. That looks the same as every other. A lot of stitches wrong.
I tried moving early. Oh, I'm sorry. I tried early moving. I tried early moving. I tried early moving, early sleeping early, before the day could hide away its time in me, could stay my journey, stay in my coat. But night is so much like day these days, one holed up inside the other, the way desire, predators, the sloth in me, and the sloth in me predates desire. That was definitely a lockdown poem.
Predates.
Exactly. I reached an arm. Across Louise, and doing so, I made a shape. It gave me pause, a wending shape, an absent mind, she said, goes limb to limb with the sublime. Our dialogue was saucerless and glassy, overgrown with cultures, like the sunless pool of water ponding underneath our garden chairs. A multiplying trawl of stillnesses, wisdomless and gold with fish, she said. And this is where I stayed my listening to scratch an itch of shame. A goldfish pond is mostly water, little gold in it at all, despite its name. Why the dead? Why the dead? This woman, Jean, come after me, distended in their crowns. I don't know why the dead come after me in crowds of Jeans, proclaiming that the god of death, before the door to life was shut, slipped out into the slapping rain. Today is Easter Sunday, and I'm reading Jean again. I had a little intuition left in me. Endured on broth, I boiled off the bones of intuition. It's a dirty game to go on intuition only. To follow intuition like a dog across the sluices and sand, to leave my slurried footprints in the sulfur. A juried thing, a ceremony, bound to do its civil duty, to lay the bread of intuition at the feet of beauty. Tell you what, this intuition assuaged everyone but me. Am I indulgent? Am I indulgent? Yes. As snow indulges in capacity, endeavors to be sexless, fails, and sticks to everything. If I am indulgent, Tell me how to put this causal impulse down back into its spring-loaded box. Like snow surveils the hemisphere. Leaves us naked, pauses in embarrassment. I am indulgent, yet recompense of mind, or so they say, like snow, is not a choice. Without work. Without work, I'm still sure work will come. It always does. Like flu expects to find a lung, or drought, the desultory ember in the stove lengths and leaves. I hope for accident to be bowled down, pat dry, sent home, where work will wait for me expectantly behind the eaves and wave its broken plank at me. Section 4, on invention. On invention. 1. In De Inventione, Cicero suggests, quote, that which is concerned in the discussion and explanation of things has 3 parts: fable, history, and argument. Fables, he says, are statements that are, quote, neither true nor probable. His example, huge winged snakes joined by one common yoke. History, rather, is, quote, an account of exploits which have been performed, removed from the recollection of our own age. Appius declared war against the Carthaginians. Argument, he says, is an imaginary case, which still might have happened. 2. In the fable of my life, my brother was born an addict, crested into this world with blue lips, sucking the fentanyl lollipop. When he came forth, the world was already full of me. In my early memories, I argue with myself not to stab my own eye with a kitchen knife. I pick at the fragile taut skin over my larynx until it bleeds and scabs. Rituals to save off this other girl, whose dark ideas often seem sane and rational, the imaginary case. Our history is that my brother started using young. I became the child sister of the child addict, the children of the parents of an addict, the argument, teenagers aging backwards, huge winged snakes joined by a common yoke. 3. I found the full text of Cicero's De Inventione, which he wrote between 91 and 88 BC, online. While searching for the transcript of a story I heard on NPR about the future of food processing. Quote, the rift between the reinvention camp and the de-invention camp has existed for decades, explained journalist Amanda Little. One side covets the past, the other side covets the future. The word de-invention caught my ear, so I Googled it. Cicero's text was the first viable result under a music video, and try this search again with reinvention. De-invention, an invented word signifying the opposite. De-inventione, when a word emerges from the ether like a tender cotyledon, I snip it up. I tried to use it in a poem. De-invention, I thought, was an apt and complicated metaphor for a tubal ligation procedure I am considering, the de-invention of an ideal of womanhood tied to mothering, of personhood tied to parenting. The poem was not viable, but I've collected it here in a pail. Call it de-invention, little big procedure of the mind. As if a fable came unstitched within me by a hand beneath a table. 5. My mother was also the child sister of a child addict. Before me, 3 generations have parented addicted sons, Mildred, Anne, and Lynn, each spending their lives with their horns locked to their sons' horns, in love and in agony. My decision to abstain from parenthood, a privilege I do not take for granted, is locked in part to this argument. But this history, unlike Cicero's definition, is undetached, abject, attached to my recollection. Early memories shadowed by later ones. In the fable of my life, addiction is passed from hand to hand like a hot coal. My brother holds it, palm open. 6. Trigger warning, content warning for some medical trauma in this section. 6. When I tried an IUD, I bled down my leg as I was led to the ultrasound room. They pressed the device against me and told me it was normal. When I still had pain a month later, they told me it was normal to have pain for a month, to have pain for 3 months, to have pain for up to a year. Their argument to give it time, the imaginary case. When I had it removed, I wept. It landed on a silver tray with a wet resonance. The invention. I got on the pill, which made my periods worse. That's abnormal, the nurses told me, as if a fable came unstitched within me by a hand beneath a table. I invent a future version of myself who changes her mind about parenting. Knife, gestating knife, but she's unviable. I de-invent her, close the leather book. I unhook her from the wooden yoke, from her brother, from her uncles, from her mothers. You don't want a child like your brother, a therapist asks without asking. Well, what about if you have a child like you? A girl, tethered to her silence. Spelling by accident, ligation as litigation on my consultation request form, a little on the nose. In the fable of my life, I was born childless. History congeals into fable, and fable argument. One side covets the past, the other the future. You don't get the chance to read that one out loud very often. Thank you for listening. This is section 5. It's called High Bun. It's a collection of high bun. It's an ancient Japanese form which combines prose and poetry, typically a form of travelogue, and I've strayed just a bit from that. On moving. Like butter gone, I'm moving on because it would be ludicrous to stay. It feels like a return to sanity, although I've never been. I've never lived a mile west of Illinois. I come home from the soaring, Rilke writes, which I take as imperative. Omit the I. To ground, return to earth. To grind the fable of my life down like orpiment into a yellow ash and tie my body to the floor. Rilke writes of God still roaring in my ears, but God, for me, today, is fear. Goodbye to my deteriorating house. Delirium, I'm out the door. Stasis is a sieve through which I drag myself. Literature feels far away. Black bulls grazing beyond a pale hill. On poetry. I know a little poetry. It frightens me. The way it breaks, the way experience breaks in, or it breaks out like mold on plums, a ring of rash around the mouth, or wilderness, loose stem blanketing the earth and breaking down to dirt. I know a little poetry. I've broken down. I wept into the zenith of a rose, each tear a globe. The way John Donne rhymes wind and find in the final stanza of Weeping. I've come that close. Ars Poetica, yelling representative into a deadline. On breath. I am underinterpreting my symptoms, the doctor says. My interpretation can no longer be trusted. I'm seated in a glass spirometry machine. On one monitor, green lines tick against a dark backdrop. On another, a cursor draws roulettes. It will feel like you're breathing with your mouth against a brick wall, the doctor says. Air buckles behind my lips. So in love with interpretation, I'm blue in the face from kissing it. I've grown accustomed to, even fond of, these brief conditions, reliefs. On theater. I wrote a play, Out Cold in Urgent Care, heated blankets toweling my sweated hair. When staged, the actress playing Mother held a wicker broom for acts 2 and 3, with which she beat and beat the rug. A heavy tapestry rolled across the deck. It jumped with fleas, a cast of tiny specks that leapt with urgent hunger as she swept. Lucidly I slept. I always do when in duress. No escape from the world of the page. So I wondered how I would create the effect on stage, what props and practical effects, and who would clean up the mess. I quit theater because it spoiled other darknesses for me. On dreaming. I walk across the wide array of teeming aero barns, 100 teeming prefab barns with silver hoop house roofs. Inside, 100,000 horses decommissioned for the evening of their gleaming, grip their crooked teeth against their stalls. And then a docent wind, and I'm standing in the centriole, error garden, its treasure guarded by a foal. I sleep like sleep is water, sleeping lugged around in steel canteens. Unknowing. What I didn't know grew over what I knew. Like sober news from home, it sobered me. It touched down like a flea of doubt, touched down on me and bit. So suddenly, like tardy students at the door, a little sadness on their faces as they make their plea. My grace a sham, a fraying pillowcase. Helicopter seeds, annunciation amid Iowa weather. This next poem is a homage poem to Dion Brand, who I heard was just here on campus. Just last week. It's so amazing. I'm so jealous. She's a favorite of mine. On beauty. At least 2 poets, hordes of them, Brand writes in winter epigrams. 100 other women that I know, applause. And I, the poem breaks, and I can't wait to become old and haggard. Can't wait, she writes, an absolute, ribbon turning back to string. Then we don't have to sidle up to anything. Don't, she writes, instead of won't. And shows her hand. A future tense unravels, comes unmanned. Don't, imperative, a beautiful demand. Her we, like poetry, we come uncouth. Truth is beauty. Beauty isn't truth. Haggard already, I slip my bridle, sidle up and out of youth. On growth. I have a worm beneath my hair, a future worm, a nerve from the eternal present, crawled out of a wedding urn. My worm has no utility, a boiled-looking, ruddy thing. He made a home of incongruency. Emily, he fathomed me. Not self or buzzed self, not self strung out on beauty, but my worm, afraid and unafraid, as lassoed by my string. I first published this poem with line breaks, but it regrew from cut parts. That's a true story. Just two more. I want to thank you all again for having me here this evening and for your attention. And for Green College and UBC and my wonderful hosts and all of you. On influence. I'm under it, addicted to the family disease. My obsessions weigh on me. It's loud, the membrane language of the brain, but plain, like spoken language overheard. Like laudanum and anchovies to clean the nerve, to ease the rash, to being good, this paragraph. If I could think a single thought that didn't burn itself to ash, I would. On difficulty. Difficulty is sacred. Even this thought, like a yawn that fights its way out the cochlea, private as a runny nose. The word say that begins Kay Ryan's seminal poem. When the rain cannot make you more wet, say its own unit of meaning until when arrives and the unit is transformed. Say when is then tripled by rain. Tripled by the rain, which rhymes with the poet's name. Rhyme is so public, weeping openly in a crowded latitude. Thank you so much.